Thank you very much to all three of you. Paul Henman from the University of Queensland. I'm wanting to ask the question about where is the balance between centralisation and coordination and more decentralisation and allowing diversity. And I want to illustrate that by the case of the government.gov.uk website, which was mentioned before. They have gone down a track where they're basically removing a lot of the agency websites and shifting them all into one mega website. And as a result of that, the ownership of the information has been removed from the agencies that are responsible for the services and the policy and being rewritten by people in centre. And that causes politics, but also creates a question about the capacity for policy and service delivery to change by those that are responsible, and how does that interact. Now that's an information situation. The other alternative, which is the US government portal, which is basically a hub and spoke model. It doesn't actually have very much information on it, and it points people to everywhere else. Now that's just an information model, but when you're talking about the systems examples that were given across the board about service integration, to what extent does that centralisation bring benefits, and to the extent does it create problems of lock-in and reduces the capacity for individual changes? Now, another model might be for government to create certain types of functionalities that that the private sector or other units can pick up on. So, if the example of the New Zealand was the lifetime situations, having a baby, you can imagine that there's a lot of private sector services associated with it. Does it make sense to have one government website service delivery for change of baby? It's completely separate to any private sector stuff. Or does it make sense for government to provide the applications that the private sector can have? I'm just interested in your reflections on that balance between the two.
You kick off.
Look, I think it's one of the most vexing issues I think that have been faced in this whole area. So firstly, I think it's context specific. You know, what is the nature of your jurisdiction, and how do you tend to work is an important factor. What have others done and spectacularly failed with? And there are some great examples. I mean, the UK example of the gov.uk, we're not emulating that aspect of it, because we've seen that it's caused some difficulty. And our approach, as I say, is to try and, you could argue we're fudging it by saying it's centrally led, collaboratively delivered, but it's acknowledging that a lot of the talent, the skill, the knowledge, the passion for the service, for the information sits out in the agencies, and always will and always should. But if we let everybody just do their own thing, we'll go back to having 500 or 600 websites. So it's I think it's an art rather than a science. And I do like your idea, and we're certainly very keen on this, that government isn't the only provider. But I do think, going back to the birth of a child event, we're actually trying to use that as a bit of a demonstration of what can be done. But ultimately, I would like to see us as government being able to produce, the basic facility, but with the, call them APIs or whatever you want to call them, that allow the private sector to then plug and play and add their value to that. And if they want to monetize it, that's up to them, if people want to buy it. But government, I think, will always have to provide a relatively, at least a base level model that still meets citizen expectations.
Yeah, sure. We tend to believe very much in a federated model because, trying to centralize everything causes a lot of issues, and I think many governments have gone through that whole journey. But what's important for us is really establishing what we call the single version of truth. So, for example, if a particular agency owns certain data, we should designate them, for example, address we talk about. For us, the Ministry of Home Affairs owns the official address. Nobody else should own it. And how do we share the data is through APIs. We put an API gateway together. People can take the data out, create apps with it, but they need to take the data from the right place. The biggest challenge today is that there are many versions of truth in government, right? we should be very careful about who owns the data, because the data owner needs to maintain that. If they don't do that, then the proliferation is going to kill everybody. The other thing also is that there's a difference between agency-specific systems and what we call whole of government system. We believe that there is something strategic that no single agency can do on their own. Then normally it's centrally funded through the Ministry of Finance, and that's where we create systems that can tie multiple agencies together. And also, back to Colin's point, right? Who holds the money basically have the biggest say in this. So in this case, if the Ministry of Finance is working with us to fund certain whole of government strategic projects, people will stand in line to work together with that because they need the money to make that happen. So that's how we kind of take that. So I don't think we are in that process of trying to pull everyone together. That's not the point.
I think the only thing I would add, just two observations. We call it now the discovery layer in the organisation. Our organisation is sitting as a service delivery layer for 26 agencies. So if you go on to our website, and please don't, it's a patchwork quilt, because each of those policy programs have been written by a policy agency, and we go to market representing them. So it just looks like 200 products that are very hard to understand. Our analytics are telling us that websites are actually right back there with Pac-Man. Let's just give up. We get 90 million hits a year. We're one of the biggest websites. We're BOM, the Bureau of Met in Australia is the biggest government website. Apparently looking up the weather is more important than looking up what government's doing. But so we get 90 million hits a year, so it's a big service channel. And actually all we do with it really is generate traffic, because of the complexity of the language we use and the explanation in explaining the government products out to the citizen population. So I actually think the new game will be utilising private sector-led search engines, but the government to really focus hard on the delivery of the content in plain English, so that going to the discovery layer doesn't generate a call into a more expensive channel. And just want to quickly give a kudos to Chris Jordan, the Tax Commissioner. He completely is revamping the way they talk, and he got the Telegraph in Sydney, journalists, to sit down and rewrite a number of their communications, letters particularly, but it's moving into the web space, and it had a phenomenal impact on the customer's behaviour. So I think content and generation of it, focus on plain English is where the government's game should be at, and then how do we make that available so whether you're building a private sector app or you're a part of a search engine, you can find us. Because our analytics tells us of the 90 million people that come to us, 72% come via Google. And yet we're maintaining our own search engine. Why? Yep.
I'm going to have to wrap it up because I know there's a very tight timeline. I don't know if your experience was the same as mine. It was fabulous listening to you guys and the work you're doing. What I really loved was the honesty about it. And if I took two messages home from what you all said, and I think I could have taken hundreds. First was the issue about trust, both protecting the trust that citizens like to have around government and the services it provide, but also trusting citizens to understand that they actually know what they want and need, particularly in services they don't get any choice about. There has been a tendency to assume you don't have much choice, so you don't have to have much voice. I think those days are well and truly over. And the second really strong point that came across was speed. Not just the really importance of getting people expecting a response, but taking so long to develop things. And the idea that you might junk things within days is something that has been traditionally very foreign to the public sector, where we never get rid of a pilot. Well, this is a world where you don't even have time for pilots. It is a time for speed. Thank you very much. Thank you.